How's it going, fight fans? Welcome to mindforcombat. If you're new to the channel, my name's Rohan, and here on my platform I talk about MMA and boxing and just talk about the worlds of fighting and discuss it with each and every single one of you. I need your help to grow my platform, so why don't you hit the subscribe button and like the video or dislike the video. Either way, just let me know what you think about the content in the comment section below. So for this video, I'm going to be going through the main card of UFC on ESPN plus 13 and giving my picks for the entire main card. Bit of a tongue twister there, but then I do get tongue tied, so it's kind of separate. In this video, I'm not going to be doing in-depth breakdowns on each fight. I don't want the video to end up being like an hour long, like I've seen some people that do full fight card breakdowns. I'm just going to quickly go through each fight and just give my prediction and let you guys know what I think about the fights. So this is an interesting card. It's got some interesting fights on it, some fights that are not so interesting, and there's some that should have some impact on some divisions, and even a return of Urijah Faber that I'm looking forward to. So without further ado, let's get into it. So opening up the card, we're going to have Robertson versus Wellington Thurman. Now this fight is, I suppose, it's a good opener for a fight night card. There's not really much to be said about it. Robertson is the 28-year-old who you would last remember seeing him fight Glover Teixeira. He had some success early in that fight, and eventually he got taken down and submitted, and he took that fight on short notice. So he's 28 years old, he's 6'1", he's got a 74-inch reach, and he fights Wellington Thurman, who's only 22 years old, is making his UFC debut on a 4-fight win streak. He stands at 6 foot tall, and he's on, like I say, he's on a 4-fight win streak. Robertson's coming off a loss. He's 1-2 over his last 3 fights, and I believe he's 2-2 in the UFC, and he's even won a fight on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contenders. Now, coming into this fight, there's only one key thing that I think really needs to be discussed here, is that Robertson has had experience against higher level of opposition. He's obviously had some success against Glover Teixeira on short notice. Before that, he beat Jack Marshman, who's a good UFC caliber level fighter, and he's also beaten Ryan Spann, who's doing good stuff in the UFC's light heavyweight division. I feel like that experience should ride him to a win over the young 22-year-old who's making his debut in the UFC on short notice. He's on a 4-fight win streak, but he hasn't really fought anyone of that caliber yet. So I think this should be a win for Robertson. But again, this is a tough one to predict because there's not really too much footage on Wellington Thurman that I could dig out, and the stuff that I had seen of him, he's not bad, but nothing that leads me to believe that he should be able to get the win here. So moving on, we've got Marvin Vittori versus Mutante Cesar Ferreira. Now, Marvin Vittori, he's an interesting fighter. In his last fight, which was over a year ago now, he fought Urijah, where he lost a split decision, and he really gave Israel a lot of trouble. And after that fight, a lot of people were getting ready to write off Israel as a hype job. Actually, when I've done a few of my breakdowns, when I've broken down Israel's fights, I've pointed to that fight as proving that Israel's not really as good as what he's being made out to be. But is it just a case that Marvin Vittori is actually better than what I'm giving him credit for? Maybe that's possible, and I feel like this is going to be an interesting fight when he's fighting the 34-year-old Cesar Ferreira to prove himself. Marvin Vittori is only 25 years old, so he's 9 years younger than Cesar Ferreira. He stands at 6 foot tall, as opposed to Cesar Ferreira, who's 6'1", so he's going to be 1 inch taller than Vittori. And Vittori's got a 74-inch reach, as opposed to Cesar Ferreira's 78-inch reach. Marvin Vittori comes into this fight with a record of 12 wins, 4 losses, and 1 draw, and he fights Cesar Ferreira, who's 13-7. Now, Marvin Vittori, outside of his decent performance against Israel Adesanya, hasn't beaten anyone of note. He hasn't really shined, and he hasn't given me nothing to show that he's that top echelon of fighter. Cesar Ferreira, whilst he's coming off a loss to Ian Heilish, I'm going to say his name terrible, so Ian. He's actually got some pretty good wins on this ledger. He's beaten Jack Hermanson, which is a loss that's aged really well. He's also beaten the likes of Anthony Smith once upon a time. That's a win that's aged really well. And he beat Nate Marquardt once upon a time. So these are good wins that he's racked up over his career, and he's a relevant fighter, better than his record would suggest. He's obviously had a few bad stoppage losses, but I don't feel that's something that's going to happen here. It might happen, I just don't see it. So I'm going to go with Cesar Ferreira as the more proven fighter to get the win here over Marvin Vittori. Moving up, we've got Beneil Dariush coming back to take on Drakkar Klose. Now, this is a really good fight at lightweight. I think a lot of Beneil Dariush. Beneil Dariush is a very talented fighter who's shown an all-round, well-rounded skill set. Now, he's had some bad KO losses in recent years, Edson Barboza and Alexander Hernandez. Particularly the Alexander Hernandez one, that was on short notice, but the Edson Barboza one was particularly brutal to watch, and the Edson Barboza loss really set in trend, really broke his streak. He was on a good run up until then. I believe he had been 7-1 over his last 8 before he had fought Edson, and after that fight, he hasn't really been able to pick up his mojo. Interestingly, coming into this fight, he's on a 2-fight win streak, 2 decisions, and he's trying to make it 3 in a row against Drakkar Klose, who's won 2 in a row since his loss to David Hamer. And Drakkar Klose is a pretty good fighter, I think, all round. He's got some good wins as well. So just quickly going through some of the details. Beneil Dariush is 30 years old. He's fighting Drakkar Klose, who's 31 years old. So they're both young, both in their prime. They're both fighting each other at a good time. Drakkar Klose stands at 5'8", which is 2 inches shorter than Beneil Dariush, who's 5'10". And then you got a 72-inch reach for Beneil Dariush as opposed to Drakkar Klose's 70-inch reach. So we're going to have a little bit of a reach advantage there for Beneil Dariush. Drakkar Klose has a record of 10-1. Beneil Dariush is 16-4-1. And I feel like Beneil Dariush's overall game should ride him to victory here. Drakkar Klose is a very good wrestler, but Beneil Dariush has a more well-rounded game. He's got good wrestling, he's got really good striking, and he's got a good submission game as well. So I believe he's got enough of a ground game and wrestling game to keep it on the feet, and I feel like on the feet he enjoys an advantage. Of course, Drakkar Klose could crack him, but he hasn't really shown me brutal one-punch knockout power anyway. So given the fact that Beneil Dariush has beaten some really good fighters like Carlos Diego Ferreira, who's currently streaking, he's beaten Jim Miller, he actually stopped Michael Johnson's win streak. Once upon a time he's knocked out James Vick, gave him his first loss. He beat Rashid Magomedov, who's a really good fighter, and he beat Drew Dober in his last fight, which is a good win. Now Drakkar Klose has beaten Lando Venata and Bobby Green, which are good wins, but Beneil Dariush's resume is just so much more impressive to me, so I'm going to go with Beneil Dariush to get the win in this one. Moving on, we've got a key fight at featherweight. It's going to be between Mirsad Bektic versus Josh Emmett, and I believe the winner of this fight is going to put themselves in prime position to be 1 or 2 wins away for potentially getting a title shot. And this is a really important fight for Mirsad Bektic. Mirsad Bektic is a guy who was undefeated, a highly touted prospect, and then he went into his fight with Darren Elkins. Now, of course, we all saw what happened in the Darren Elkins fight. It became a sort of historic moment in the UFC with that brutal comeback from behind after being dominated for 2 rounds, and that really shows how tough Darren Elkins is. But overall, Mirsad Bektic has been pretty phenomenal in his career, and he's won 2 fights in a row since that loss, and it looks like he's kind of paced it and put himself in a position to get back on a run now. He fights Josh Emmett, the 34-year-old, who's 6 years older than Mirsad Bektic at 28, who's coming off a brutal knockout win in his own right. He just knocked out Michael Johnson, which was a brutal knockout win, and prior to that he had lost in a main event performance against Jeremy Littlehaven Stevens, and before that he had knocked out Ricardo Lamas in brutal fashion as well. So he's had some really good success lately as well. 2-1 in his last 3, 3-1 in his last 4, and he's a really good fighter. When we're looking at some of the key factors in this, Josh Emmett is 2 inches shorter than Mirsad Bektic. Josh Emmett stands at 5'6", whilst Mirsad Bektic stands at 5'8". Mirsad Bektic has a 70-inch reach, which gives him an even reach with Josh Emmett. Mirsad Bektic has a record of 13-1 coming into this fight, and he's fighting Josh Emmett, who has a record of 14-2. Sorry, I try to remember most of this off the top of my head. I've written down some key notes to remember because I'm doing the whole card, but I try to remember it off the top of my head. But yeah, so I feel like Mirsad Bektic, A, he's younger than Josh Emmett, and B, he's showing me a more complete game than Josh Emmett coming into this fight. I believe that he's demonstrated more to me than Josh Emmett has, and I believe that he should be able to get the win. I feel like the loss to Darren Elkins was a good learning experience from him. As brutal as it was a good learning experience for him, and I believe he's been able to improve since then, and his most recent form has shown me that. So I'm going to go with Mirsad Bektic to get the win. Moving on, Urijah Faber makes his comeback at 40 years old, and he fights a young prospect, a young prospect in Ricky Simone, who's 26 years old. Ricky Simone is only 3-0 in the UFC, and his best wins over Rani Yahya in his last performance. He's 15-1 overall, and he fights Urijah Faber, who's at 40 years old. He's got a record of 34-10. He hasn't fought in about 3 years. I believe December 2016 was his last fight, so a little under that, maybe 2.5 years. But he's a guy who's kept himself in good shape throughout that time, and he's really maintained himself, stayed in a drug pool, and I believe he always had some intention to come back at some point. So, and that kind of shows with the fact that he stayed in the USADA pool. This is a hard fight for me to pick, because in my mind, if all things were equal, Urijah Faber was in his prime, I'll pick him 10 times out of 10. But that's not the case. He's 40 years old. He's had 2.5 years off, and even before he retired, in losses to Jimmy Rivera, going 1-3 in the last 4 before he won his fight against Brad Pickett, he didn't show me nothing to let me believe that he was going to get a resurgence at that point. Now, add in the fact that he's aged a couple more years, he's had all this time off. Now, he might be rejuvenated, but I don't see that as being the case. Whilst I'm not sold on Ricky Simone as a top prospect, I believe that he should be able to get a win over a 40-year-old Urijah Faber in this fight, and that could be interesting. In the main event, we have the Iron Lady, the lineal featherweight champion, taking on a young up-and-comer Aspen Ladd. Now, this is a good fight at women's 135. Not a fight that I would have thought should have been the main event, but whatever the case, it is the main event. Now, let's look at some of the key stats coming to this fight. Jermaine Randamie is 35 years old, which is 11 years older than the 24-year-old Aspen Ladd, so that's a key figure to remember, particularly considering how long Jermaine's been around. Jermaine's 5'9" versus Aspen Ladd, who's 5'6", so she's got a 3-inch height advantage, and she's also got a 5-inch reach advantage with a 71-inch reach as opposed to Aspen Ladd's 66-inch reach, and that's very key. Aspen Ladd comes into this fight with a record of 8-0, whereas Jermaine Randamie's got a record of 8-3. Now, there is a difference there because Jermaine Randamie's been in there with Amanda Nunes, Holly Holm. She's been in there with some very good fighters, including Julia Budd, etc. I believe she's 6-1 in her last 7. She's won 4 fights in a row in the UFC, including winning a world title. So she's been in the main event. She's been in those tough fights. She's also 37-0 in the realm of Muay Thai and kickboxing, as opposed to Aspen Ladd, who's had 3 kickboxing fights. So there's a vast discrepancy in experience here. And when you consider that Aspen Ladd's best win is Yara Eubanks and Tonya Evinger, those are good wins, but not wins that make me believe that she's world championship caliber yet. And as much as I'm not a fan of Jermaine Randamie, I have to admit that she is world championship caliber. So coming into this fight, there's a few things that you have to consider. A, Jermaine Randamie's experience advantage. She is vastly more experienced than Aspen Ladd when you consider her kickboxing experience and everything entitled. B, the striking edge that Jermaine Randamie is going to enjoy over Aspen Ladd is going to be vast. She's also been MMA long enough to have been training her wrestling, and her size, 3 inches in height, 5 inches in reach. I believe that Jermaine Randamie is going to be quite comfortable to get a win here. So I'm going to go with Jermaine Randamie to keep this on the feet and piece up Aspen Ladd over the course of the fight. Now, I'll be really happy to see Aspen Ladd walk away with a victory, but I'm just not going to predict that. I don't see that as being something that happens. I think Jermaine Randamie is going to get the win here, and it's going to be 5 in a row for Jermaine Randamie, and she may be looking at a title shot after this. So imagine that after that whole 145 fiasco. Anyways, guys, I hope I didn't drag this video on too long. I don't actually know how long it's been going on. Sorry if I got tongue-tied a few times there. A lot of information there. I'm trying to remember it all, and I do tend to speak very fast. So I've said that a few times now, and I am trying to work on that. So hopefully my delivery will keep on improving, and I will learn to get a good balance in controlling how fast I can speak. Thank you for watching, guys. Comment below with your picks for the main card, and let me know what you thought of the video. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Mindful Combat.